Hello everybody, my name is Maggie and I'm from Weller Health Education at Lehigh Valley Riley Children's Hospital. Today I'm back with another really great video. In today's video, we're going to be talking a little bit about opioid overdoses. Unfortunately, addiction has really been on the rise, and that means overdoses have been too. So it's really important for us to learn a little bit about what an overdose is, how it's caused, what the signs are, and what we can do about it. All right, everybody, let's get started. All right, my friends, so let's get started talking a little bit about opioid overdoses. So first, let's put into perspective how big this problem actually is. So, since 1999, more than 1 million people have died from a drug overdose. 1 million people. Most statisticians are finding that more people nowadays are dying from drug overdoses than from car crashes, especially in young adults. So, drug overdoses happen very often all across the country and around the world too. Now, in 2021, so to bring it a little more up to date, around 106,000 drug overdose deaths occurred in the United States. 106,000. Now, drug overdoses have been rising every single year. So every year there's been a jump in those overdose deaths. So this is a problem that is growing. It is not shrinking. And my friends, even though this may be a number on a screen, every single one of those people who lost their lives had families. They had parents who had lost their child due to an overdose. Some of them were parents themselves whose kids now are without a parent. Siblings lost their siblings. Aunts and uncles, grandparents lost their grandchildren. Right? These are people who have lost their lives, who have passed because of this drug epidemic we have going on. So keep in mind, it's very easy for us to talk about these numbers, to talk about it very easily in terms of numerical values. But just know, behind every single number you see, behind this 106,000 people who passed in 2021, those were all people who never made it home. So opioids were involved in 80,000 overdose deaths in 2021. So of that 106,000, opioids accounted for 75.4% of all drug overdose deaths. So the reason many people did have overdoses were because of opioids. Opioids were the number one drug that triggered these overdose deaths that we saw in 2021. All right, so what exactly are opioids? Opioids may be a term that you've seen in news outlets, you may have seen it online, heard people talk about it in conversation, but you may not be sure about what it is. So, opioids are a category of drugs, so it's an overall category. It's going to include a couple different types of prescription painkillers. So, these are things like Oxycontin, Percocet, and codeine. So, prescription painkillers are given pretty often, not as often as they used to be, especially back in the early 2000s. However, these prescription painkillers are very effective and they're given for people who've had very severe pain, people who've had injuries, people who've broken bones. A lot of times when people get their wisdom teeth removed, for example, they may be given a prescription painkiller like Percocet up with that pain for a few days. So for severe pain like that, for broken bones, car accidents, these painkillers are very, very effective. However, there are other types of opioids out there, such as illicit drugs like heroin. So heroin is also a type of opioid. So opioids include prescription painkillers and street drugs like heroin, right? Now these things are both incredibly powerful drugs, very, very powerful. So both prescription opioids and illicit opioids are very powerful drugs that can risk an overdose in both addicts and first-time users. So a lot of people think, oh, well, if I try it once, I'll be okay. It's the people who've been taking heroin for years, they're the people who are going to have an overdose. Not always, guys. These drugs are super, super powerful. Sometimes it really does only take one misuse to cause an overdose in somebody's body. Nearly 280,000 Americans lost their lives to overdoses involving prescription opioids for the past 20 years or so. Now, we also have a really big problem on our hands. Overdoses have been steadily rising for the past few years because of a drug called fentanyl. So there is this really powerful opioid out there. So fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that is 100 times more potent than morphine, a very common prescription opioid, and 50 times more potent than heroin. So fentanyl is very, very powerful and very concentrated. Fentanyl has been creeping its way into the drug market for the past 10 years or so, and it's been really spiking for the past 5. Now, fentanyl is being laced not only with other opioids like prescription painkillers and heroin, but also with other other types of drugs too. So other street drugs that we see, things like cocaine, things like methamphetamine, a lot of party drugs like ecstasy tablets, a lot of those are being laced with fentanyl. They're being sold as traditional ecstasy tablets. The people receiving it do not know that fentanyl is involved, take it, and unfortunately risk having an overdose. Fentanyl is incredibly powerful, and it really only takes very few micrograms of fentanyl to trigger an overdose in a grown adult, especially in teenagers who are mixing it with other types of drugs too. Now, death from an opioid overdose happens when too much of that drug overwhelms the brain. So, whenever you take any type of drug, but especially things like opioids, it's going to affect your nervous system and your brain. It's going to bind to the receptors in your brain, and it's going to block different things like pain, for example. That's why prescription opioids are so effective for pain management. They block those receptors in our brain that say, hey, you just broke your back, you're in a lot of pain. So, they can be effective in a medical setting. But the problem is when you take too much, it overwhelms your brain and it puts it into a very slow state. It slows down your breathing and it slows down your heart rate. It can slow down your heart rate to the point where it stops. It interrupts the body's natural drive to breathe. Now, anyone who uses an opioid can experience an overdose, especially when it's being misused, but there are a couple of things that can increase your risk. Things like combining opioids with alcohol. Alcohol, my friends, is a depressant. That means it's going to slow down your body and slow down your brain. Well, let's remember from the other slide, what else slows down your body and your brain? Opioids do. So when you're mixing an opioid with alcohol, you're putting two different types of depressants into your body at once. That can absolutely overwhelm your nervous system and your brain, triggering your heart to stop and an overdose. So just know when you're mixing it with alcohol, you are increasing the potency of that opioid and risking your heart stopping. Next, taking more opioids than prescribed. Like I said earlier, opioids can be prescription painkillers and be effective in a medical setting, but it's all about following the instructions. No matter what age you are, whether you are a teenager or you are a full-grown adult, in life, when it comes to medicine, we have to read the directions, especially when it comes to opioids. That is a medicine you do not mess around with. That is not one you can double up on, like things like Tylenol and Advil, which you honestly shouldn't double up on either. You should always take it as it's prescribed. So opioids are things that you have to follow those instructions exactly. When you are taking 2 pills or 3 pills, taking your doses too close together. If you took an opioid at 8 o'clock, you have to wait a certain amount of hours before you can take it again. I know that pain can be unbelievable, but when you are overlapping those doses, you are increasing your risk for overdosing. Taking illicit opioids, so when you are turning to other things like heroin or other types of very potent opioids like manufactured fentanyl. There are certain types of medical conditions out there which can increase your risk for an overdose. So things like sleep apnea, surprisingly, and especially things that are involved in detoxifying your body, like your kidneys and your liver. So if anybody has any types of kidney diseases, liver diseases, you're at an increased risk for overdoses. And then the elderly too, people who are 65 years and older. All right, my friends, so it's important to know the signs of an opioid overdose. All right, we can't talk about overdoses without finding out what it looks like when somebody's actually experiencing one. Now, my friends, I hope in your lifetime you never have to see somebody have an overdose. I really, really, truly, in my heart of hearts, hope you never have to see that. All right, that's a very scary thing to see, especially with somebody that you truly care about. However, because overdoses are on the rise, it is important to recognize the signs and the symptoms just in case if you're ever in a situation where somebody may be going through this. So you know what to do, you know what's going on, and you can recognize that, hey, this person could potentially pass away if I don't do something soon. So signs of an opioid overdose. Number 1, if you open up their eye, even if it seems like they're kind of asleep, you open up their eye, the pupil of their eye, the black part right here, it's going to be very, very small. It's almost going to be so small it looks like the tip of a pin. Next, that person is falling asleep or they've completely lost consciousness. You are shaking them, you are yelling their name, you have put water on them, they still really won't wake up. They are staying asleep. Next, very slow, shallow breathing. It may seem like they're not even breathing at all, but the breaths they may take may sound almost a little bit wheezy and very, very slow. Next, choking or gurgling sounds. Many times when somebody's having an overdose, they may actually vomit. So it's important to put that person on their side because that gurgling sound you may hear is that person choking on their own vomit. Their bodies can be very limp. They may not be moving at all, and if they are, they could barely even lift their arms, their fingers. Their skin is very pale. They almost may be a little bit on the bluish tinge, especially around their fingertips and around their lips, and their skin will be very cold. Now, what do you do if you see somebody with an overdose? You see somebody with those signs. Now, the most important thing to remember with an overdose, time is what counts the most. It is all about time. During an overdose, breathing can be dangerously slow or it can be stopped altogether. When breathing has stopped, that means oxygen is no longer getting to the parts of our body, especially our brain, and that can cause permanent brain damage or death. So it's important to know those signs and act fast. Calling 911 right away. Sometimes you may have to do CPR to keep that person's heart beating, to get oxygen getting to that person's brain so they don't experience permanent brain damage. Now, a lot of people lately have been keeping something called naloxone on hand. Now, there's another name for this. There's a brand name called Narcan that you may have heard of. So what naloxone is, it is a life-saving drug for people experiencing an opioid overdose. It is truly amazing when you see naloxone being administered. What it is, it's a spray. You spray into that person's nose. When that drug hits their system, it completely reverses the effects of an opioid overdose. Many emergency workers, people who work in school systems, police officers, they keep naloxone on hand. So even if you think the situation is hopeless, that person you see having an overdose, it's going to be scary. They may even look like they're dead. Their skin will be blue, they're not breathing, they're not awake. I promise there can be a way to save them, but again, it is all about time. If we can call 911 quickly, or if you happen to have naloxone on hand, administer it, because that is a way to save that person if they still have time. Try to keep the person awake and breathing. So if they are experiencing any type of eye movement or they are moving a little bit, try to keep them awake. Do not let them fall asleep. You don't want to hurt them. Don't be shaking them or hitting them to keep them awake. However, try your best to keep that person focused on you and focused on their breathing. Make sure you lay the person on their side. Remember how I said sometimes person having an overdose may vomit? Well, if they're laying on their back, that vomit can collect in their esophagus, causing choking. Many times people actually pass away from that choking during an overdose. So lay them on their side, try to maybe pat their back slightly to loosen up any of that vomit that may be lodged in their throat to help prevent choking. And finally, stay with him or her or them until emergency workers have arrived. So stay with them, do not abandon them. Even if yourself have participated in some type of illegal drug use, in that moment, we cannot be focused on ourselves. We have to be focused on the person who could potentially be hurt from an overdose. You cannot abandon them, all right? Even if it's scary, even if you don't know what to do, that is okay. Calling 911, having emergency workers come very quickly, and again, following these steps is the most important thing. Time is of the essence. So stay with them until emergency workers have arrived. Again, my friends, like I said earlier, I hope in your lifetime you never have to experience having an overdose or witness somebody having an overdose. But because of the situation we have right now with this current drug epidemic, it's important to keep this information filed somewhere in the back of your head. My friends, I really hope you all learned something new today. I know this wasn't exactly the most cheerful topic, however, it is important. I really hope you all can say you learned something new, you can recognize the signs of an overdose, and now you know what to do in that situation if an overdose is happening to somebody you know and love. Right? So my friends, thank you all for watching. Make sure you all subscribe to our channel. If you want to learn more information about things like opioids and fentanyl, we just put out a video on that. I'm going to link that down below. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye!